For those of you that are not familiar with SES and SES Government Solutions, we're a global owner-operator. We have 54 satellites at geosynchronous orbit, and we have 16 satellites at medium Earth orbit, formerly known as O3b, as Richard pointed out. O3b, to me, is what LEO is promising 3 or 4 years from now, with very high throughput, very low latency, and supporting 4 COCOMs today. My purpose really is to introduce a great American, a warfighter, that we're all here to listen to and perhaps ask tough questions for. It's Lieutenant General David D.T. Thompson. He started his Air Force career by graduating from the Air Force Academy in 1985 with a degree in astronautical engineering. He also has a master's degree in aeronautics and astrophysics from Purdue University. He won the Wing Boxing Championship in 1984 and 1985 at the heavyweight class. Not only does he possess the intellectual energy to move the space enterprise forward, but he has a physical prowess to maybe shape the attitudes of the non-believers. So how about a warm WSBR welcome to a great American warfighter, General D.T. Thompson.
Ladies and gentlemen, it really is an honor and a privilege to be here today. First of all, let me say to Richard and Pete, thanks for hosting this event and actually asking my boss to come and speak. If you can't be enthused and excited about what's going on in space today, maybe you need a new job. When you really think about it, and really the energy and the excitement and the enthusiasm really started probably about in late 2013 to 2014, and really by the end of that year, this nation and the administration that was in place at the time and the administration that has followed recognized that we had a serious challenge in space and we as a nation had to face up to. You know, and as a result of that energy that began there and that has actually come not just from the challenge we faced in space from a military perspective, but also the opportunities that are unfolding in the commercial sector and elsewhere has generated an incredible amount of enthusiasm and with good reason. You know, when you think about some of the things that have happened recently in terms of the reestablishment and the reinvigoration of the National Security Space Council, when you think about some of the investments that we've seen as recently as fiscal year 19 and the president's budget associated with that, when you see the investment and the innovation and the creativity that is flooding through the commercial market right now. You know, commercial space for years has been grounded in launch, it's been grounded in satellite communications, it's been grounded in remote sensing. And those specific sectors of the commercial space market, I think, are not only are they experiencing a renaissance, but there's also, I think, we're on the verge of commercial space branching into whole new areas and sectors and perhaps services that most of us perhaps dreamed of only when we were young folks that we may see soon. Perhaps even similar to, you know, what we saw, excuse me, perhaps 15 years ago. In IT, when we started moving from, you know, mobile phones that were about this size and computers that, you know, that cost $2,500 and could fit in a medium-sized box to where we are today with smartphones and that sort of technology. I firmly believe we may be on the threshold of a similar revolution in space here in the next 5 or 10 years as we were in IT and networks and computing capabilities back then. So there's a lot of tremendous enthusiasm and excitement and energy in this sector, whether it's military or civil or commercial. And so what I'd like to talk to you all about today is some of the things that excite me, you know, and really even having done this, and if you do look at my bio, one of the things, the theme you'll see is when it comes to space and serving in various space assignments and jobs in the military, I've done pretty much all of it, which really made me a jack of all trades, master of none in that regard. I'm not sure I've ever been as excited in 33 years of service as I am now, and that's for a whole host of reasons. So I'd like to talk to you a little bit today about what makes me so excited. And first is what I started with, and that's the alignment I see today in the nation's leaders. It starts all the way at the top. It spreads all the way across the branches of government. It's in the executive branch. It's in Congress. It's in the various departments of the executive branch. It starts with the national security strategy and goes from there. In fact, the new national security strategy that was just published says, for the first time in many years, it says unfettered access to and freedom of action in space is a vital national interest. Now, I don't think anybody would disagree. In fact, it said that for the first time since 1999. I don't think anybody would disagree in the intervening years that access to space and freedom of action in space were a vital national interest. It's just two things. First of all, there's been a lot going on in that intervening period of time. And we weren't really in a position where we recognized that there was a threat and a challenge that we faced in space. And so those words and that language and that perspective on how vital space is to our economic and national security is the basis for which, we go forward in terms of national security. When you think about what space means to our joint warfighters, when you think about things like GPS alone is responsible for $85 billion in economic activity every single year. Those are the kinds of things that our leaders recognize make space a vital national interest. The second thing that our leaders are aligned is that for better or worse, space has become a warfighting domain. Now, certainly, not that we ever want to see war in any domain, but we don't want to see war extend to space for a whole host of reasons that are important to the United States, that are important to our allies, that are important to the free world in general. But if in fact space is a warfighting domain and war is going to extend to space, we have to be prepared for that eventuality. In fact, being prepared for that eventuality makes it less likely, in my opinion, that war will extend to space rather than more likely. And unfortunately, though, whether or not it extends to space, our adversaries get 51% of that vote. And so we have to acknowledge that fact. Our leadership has. And the third piece of that is our leadership is aligned on the need to take action now to address that challenge. And again, it doesn't matter whether you're talking about the leaders in Congress, you're talking about the leaders in the executive branch, starting with the president and the head of the secretaries of the departments and the secretaries of the services. Even if you talk about the other agencies of the executive department, everybody agrees now is absolutely the time to take action if, in fact, we're going to deal with the challenge we face and the threats we face, and conversely, the opportunities that are in front of us when it comes to space. The last piece of that alignment I want to talk a little bit about is not just our national leaders, but our Air Force leaders. And this is an area that makes me just a little bit sad, and here's why. About a year ago, it's been, I guess, about 13 months now or so, roughly, our new service secretary, Secretary Wilson, became the Secretary of the Air Force. I had the privilege for the first time ever of seeing a service secretary sworn in as a secretary, and she did that on the afternoon of a Tuesday, I believe it was, and Wednesday morning she was testifying before Congress, and she was testifying before Congress about space. And you could see in her, in the few days I got to see and hear her before she was officially sworn in, and in the immediate days that followed, that from day one, she had decided one of her priorities was to ensure that the Air Force was doing what it needed to do in space. And she has in a magnificent way, in terms of being a spokesman, in terms of being an advocate, in terms of ensuring that our missions and capabilities get the resources, get the attention that it needs. She has done a tremendous job in that over the past year. I just think it's a little unfortunate she hasn't really been acknowledged and gotten the credit for that, I would say, and perhaps some of the credit she deserved in what she has done for the nation, for the Air Force, and for all of the Air Force's space missions. And the second leader that I have the privilege to serve under that has really changed the game is General Goldfein, our Chief of Staff, who from his first day in office has said very clearly, my responsibilities extend beyond the Air Force and beyond air missions. You know, for decades, it's been clearly understood and acknowledged that the Chief of Staff of the Air Force is the Joint Chief who advocates for, who understands, who represents the air domain and air domain missions among the Joint Chiefs. It's also well acknowledged and understood that when you look at the air chiefs across the world, he's the first among equals in terms of that role of bringing together global air chiefs and how those various air forces and air arms and other nations operate, work together, are a professional and relevant force and those sorts of things. From day one in his job, General Raymond has said, it's not just my job to be the Joint Chief for Air. It's not just my job to be the Global Air Chief. It is also my job to be the Joint Chief for Space to ensure that space capabilities, space equity, space considerations, space impacts are carried into the discussions with the rest of the Joint Chiefs. And it's also my responsibility to play a role with the rest of the service chiefs around the globe, international chiefs who are responsible for space. And it's very easy to tell the difference between somebody who says that's their role because they believe they're supposed to say it, and somebody who truly and firmly and in their heart believes it. And that's absolutely who we have in General Goldfein. He knows and understands in his heart he needs to do that. He also knows and understands what space represents for us today, what it represents for us in the future, and what he and the United States Air Force need to do to further and protect and ensure that those capabilities are available to the Joint Chiefs, to our allies and partners today and in years to come. In fact, he said it very clearly several times now when he said, every airman in the United States Air Force, regardless of the badge those airmen wear on their chest, has to embrace and understand and be passionate about providing space superiority the same way we have about providing air superiority for decades. And like I said, he means it to the depth of his soul, and he understands it. And so the ability to serve with those leaders, as well as perhaps the finest space leaders, pure space leaders I've ever seen. First of all, serving today General Raymond at Air Force Space Command, and before him I served under General John Hyten, who's now at Strategic Command. I could ask for no better two senior space leaders in the Department of Defense than those two. So all of the alignment of that leadership, the recognition of that leadership, and the support they have provided us is a lot of the reason I'm excited about where we are today and where we're going in space. Secondly, I'm excited about the plan we have in front of us and the focus related to that plan. I was talking to some folks just before the lunch started about what at the time was called the Space Enterprise Vision, commissioned out of Air Force Space Command and General Hyten in 2015. It started as an Air Force architecture, warfighting architecture for a warfighting domain. It quickly expanded to the NRO and to U.S. Strategic Command. It really created the blueprint for where we needed to go to address the challenges we faced from a national security perspective in space. When General Raymond came in October of 16 to lead the command, almost his first act was to say, we're going to stop talking about this as a vision and we're going to start making this a reality. And he got after that right away. And in fact, if you look at what has been funded and where we're going in the 19 budget and the capabilities that we begin and we have there that start to treat our systems like warfighting systems, that, for example, with the cancellation of SBIRS 7 and 8 and the replacement with a new missile warning architecture, recognize that these are targets. They have to be defendable. They have to contribute to their own defense. And we have to have surveillance and awareness and targeting and tracking and battle management, command and control, and those sorts of capabilities in place that allow us to protect and defend them. And we've made substantial investments in the 19 budget to do all of that, not just in space situational awareness, not just in battle management, command and control, not just in SBIRS, but in that entire enterprise. In fact, some of you have heard the number. It was almost $7 billion more that was added to the Air Force space budget across the years from 19 to 23 to get after that problem. Sometimes what you don't hear is it was about $5.5 billion more dollars of internally realigned money to get after that problem. So whether it was new or realigned across those 5 years of that budget starting in 19, that's $12.5 billion that we've put toward making sure we can get after that. That's a huge step. It's a major investment. We have more work to do, as we always do, but it really does send a message to any potential adversary that we will defend and protect our space capabilities, because our joint warfighters cannot go and conduct operations globally or potentially into combat without space capabilities, just like we wouldn't dream of sending them in there without air power, just like we wouldn't dream of sending them in with combat power provided by the United States Army or maritime power provided by the United States Navy. There can never be a situation or a scenario where we don't send our forces into operations or into potential conflict without the capabilities they need from space. So we have that plan and we have that focus, and I'm excited about that. And there's certainly more to come in that regard. And then finally, I'm excited about some of the new approaches that we're seeing, primarily in that regard in the acquisition world. Some of you perhaps were at the Space Symposium. I've read a little bit since about General J.T. Thompson. Some people are now calling me East Coast Thompson and him West Coast Thompson. So if you start to hear that, you know what they're talking about as well. Re-architecting that organization to do two things. First of all, to break up functional and mission-focused stovepipes that served us and served us well for decades, to have an enterprise approach, including an enterprise architecture, but also to focus core elements of that organization on specific capabilities. So a group focused on innovation across the mission sets, a group focused on partnership across the mission sets, a group focused on the development of new capabilities, not the development of a new missile warning capability or a new protected SATCOM capability or a new position navigation and timing capability, of new capabilities, some of which may be mission focused, but some of which will be designed to support the entire enterprise and the architecture, and there to become experts on how to identify and develop and prepare those sorts of capabilities, in addition to a group that then focuses on production. How do we produce efficiently? How do we produce effectively? How do we drive out costs? How do we learn lessons? The same sorts of things that happen in other sectors in some of your own companies. Apply that sort of model so that we become more agile, we develop these systems faster, and hopefully we do deliver them at lower cost as well. So he's done that re-architecture, as well as identified in the NDAA last year the establishment of a Space Rapid Capabilities Office, Space RCO. Now the NDAA just told us to change the name of the Operationally Responsive Space Office to become the Space RCO. And you can ask Congress their intent. My suspicion is their intent wasn't just a name change. And so I think what we're doing is really meeting the intent of Congress there, which is to also overhaul that organization. Some of you are familiar with the Air Force Rapid Capabilities Office, what it does, how it operates, and the kinds of specialty capabilities and the staff that's in that organization, the kinds of challenges they take on and the capabilities they deliver. We're in the process of rebuilding that ORS office, now the Space RCO office, in that very same light, and giving it some of the most challenging and urgent needs we have to fill in pieces of our warfighting architecture that we've never considered before. And they're already charging after that quickly. So that's another new approach. And then finally, really starting to think about new approaches in other areas. No kidding, understanding and trying to leverage what's been in the commercial market for a long time that perhaps we haven't taken advantage of. Unleashing the creativity and innovation of the sector, not just the defense-based sector, but the commercial sector. Whether we do that in launch, whether we do that in space situational awareness, whether we do that in SATCOM or remote sensing or those whole host of other areas that might be new and evolving, is looking for those new approaches to partner, but more importantly, to provide capabilities that our warfighters need to do it quickly, to do it agilely, and to do it in the face of what's truly a contested domain. So a lot of that is coming, as well as expansion of international partnerships. Secretary Wilson spoke at length about that during the Space Symposium, talking about training opportunities that are coming, talking about turning our Joint Space Operations Center in Vandenberg into a combined operations center with international partners. All of those things are here today that we need to begin implementing today. This isn't a 5-year vision, this isn't a 10-year vision. This is a today, tomorrow, and next year vision that we have to get after, and we are getting after. And all of that really excites me. So that's where we stand today. I'll do this as long as they let me, even if it means living in the District of Columbia. It's a great place, but I'll be honest, I'm a little partial to Colorado Springs. But the opportunity to do it here, the opportunity to do it for a great leader like General Raymond, and the leaders above him, the Secretary-in-Chief and the leadership of the department, I can't imagine a better time, a better place to be, or a better moment that someday in the future, the young folks here in the room will remember the days when we did the following. And like I tell our young officers and engineers and enlisted folks and civilians all the time, this isn't a moment in history where we have the time, or we have the resources, we have the support, and we have the directive to make a difference for national security space. And if we don't, then shame on us. And that's really the charge for Air Force and what it's doing in space today for the Department of Defense. And I'm sure you all share that same passion and commitment and charge as well. Thanks for your time today. I look forward to any specific questions you might have.